So picture this. It is a Thursday evening, and your partner cheerfully, like almost enthusiastically, agrees to do the dinner cleanup.
Oh, a rare treat.
Right? They tell you to finally go rest after a long, exhausting day. You feel this massive wave of relief.
Naturally, you let your guard down.
Exactly. But then, you walk into the kitchen the next morning to make your coffee, and the large, greasy pots are just sitting in the sink, filled to the brim with this cold, scummy water.
Ugh, that's the worst feeling.
When you ask about it, you get this mild, innocent look. They just tell you, oh, they need to soak.
And then they just sit there.
For days.
Yeah.
I mean, I look at those pots, and I don't see a partner who is simply a bit lazy or forgetful. I see a calculated monument to disrespect.
Wow. A monument to disrespect.
It is. It's a deliberate, covert strike of hostility that is just disguised as an innocent mistake.
Well, welcome to the debate. Today we are decoding the deeply hidden and honestly deeply confusing world of covert narcissism.
Yeah, we are drawing directly from the clinical psychology literature on passive aggression, coercive control, and relational trauma.
Right, and we're trying to answer one central question today. When dealing with a covert narcissist, is the primary mechanism of destruction their calculated predatory acquisition of power?
Which is my stance coming from the behavioral profiling perspective.
Or is it the subtle, cumulative erosion of the victim's psychological reality and nervous system, which is the side I'll be taking, representing the clinical victimology and trauma perspective?
So my view is that these abusers operate like arsonists. They intentionally blow just enough smoke under the door to trigger your internal smoke alarm while, completely hiding the flames.
Right, so there's no visible fire.
Exactly. They want the alarm to go off. They want you to panic.
Mm-hmm.
And then they want to point at you and tell the world you're crazy for panicking when there's apparently no fire.
I hear that, but I approach this from the perspective of what happens inside the body and mind of the person on the receiving end.
So you're looking at the actual damage?
Yeah, exactly. Because while I absolutely agree that the abuser's tactics are malicious, I argue that the intent is secondary to the psychological trap that is created.
Okay, explain that a bit more.
Well, covert abuse is fundamentally defined by its invisibility. Because the abuse is so subtle, it just bypasses the victim's normal intellectual defenses.
Right, it flies under the radar.
Exactly. Like if someone yells at you, your brain says, hey, I am under attack. But if someone leaves a pot to soak, your brain says, maybe they just forgot.
And that's where the doubt creeps in.
Yes. It forces the victim into this state of chronic, exhausting self-doubt. We're talking about complex PTSD, severe somatic nervous system dysregulation, and that perpetual feeling of walking on eggshells.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. Covert narcissism is, at its absolute core, a strategy of power masking as vulnerability.
But the vulnerability is what trips the victim up.
Right, but as a behavioral profiler, I have to look at the mechanics of the manipulation itself. These individuals intentionally hide their grandiosity under a shy, introverted, or even like a depressed persona specifically to weaponize guilt.
It's definitely a highly evolved adaptation.
It's a predatory adaptation. Think about it this way. If an overt narcissist wants to establish dominance, they might scream at you, insult your intelligence, or explicitly demand obedience.
It's horrible, but it's very obvious.
Exactly, it's obvious. The covert narcissist operates differently. They will shrink your favorite expensive sweater in the wash after you explicitly ask for help.
Oh, I've heard that one in clinic so many times.
Right? And then when you get understandably upset, they will slump their shoulders, look at the floor, and say, I just can't do anything right. I was only trying to help you.
And suddenly, you are comforting them.
Yes, you are comforting the person who ruined your sweater. The core issue here isn't the victim's confusion. It is the sheer calculated malice of the abuser who engineered that exact outcome.
I hear that, but I come at it from a completely different way. The malice is absolutely there, but focusing entirely on the predator's calculation just misses how the injury actually takes root.
How so?
Well, the clinical reality is that covert abuse operates through a biological mechanism called neuroception.
Okay, for those listening who might not be deep into the clinical terminology, what exactly is neuroception in this context?
Neuroception is basically your nervous system's unconscious radar. It's the mechanism that scans your environment for threats way below the level of conscious thought.
Like flinching before a baseball hits you?
Exactly. You flinch before you even realize it's a baseball. In a healthy relationship, your neuroception tells your body, I am safe with this person, which allows you to relax.
But with a covert narcissist, that radar gets jammed.
Worse than jammed. Their actions, like ruining the sweater and then playing the victim, create this profound mismatch. Your conscious mind hears, oh, I'm just a clumsy idiot trying to help.
But your body knows better.
Yes, your neuroception detects the hostility, the passive aggression, and the danger. Because the abuse is constantly denied, your autonomic nervous system gets trapped in a low-grade fight-or-flight state.
So they never get to fully relax.
Never. The victim doesn't just feel intellectually annoyed. Their dorsal vagal parasympathetic system is triggered.
Okay, break that down for me. The dorsal vagal system. We're talking about the body's emergency brake, right?
Exactly that. When fight or flight just doesn't work, the body resorts to the dorsal vagal response, which is a freeze response.
Like an animal playing dead.
Right, so the predator loses interest. But in a marriage or a workplace, it looks like emotional numbness, chronic fatigue, or just total paralysis. The victim's immune system crashes.
They start getting sick.
Yes, they develop chronic insomnia, they start having unexplained migraines. The abuser's calculation only succeeds because it systematically dismantles the victim's somatic trust in their own perception.
Wait, look at how they use pity, though. If I'm listening to this right now, I might be thinking, if we only focus on the victim's trauma response, don't we inadvertently let the abuser off the hook?
It's definitely not about letting them off the hook.
But by focusing so heavily on the biology, we risk treating this like a biological accident or an unfortunate physiological reaction, rather than a highly orchestrated campaign of coercive control.
That's not what I'm saying, though. It is about accurately diagnosing the damage so the victim can actually survive it.
But the abuser wants us to think it's just an accident.
Sure. But if a patient comes into a hospital with a gunshot wound, the doctors don't spend the first hour analyzing the shooter's motive. They stop the bleeding.
Fair enough.
But let's look at the actual behaviors that cause this bleeding daily. Let's go back to your opening example of the soaking pots.
Oh, please, let's.
Because this is where the theory hits reality. Society often completely excuses this behavior. We call it a partner just being bad at chores.
Which is incredibly frustrating to even discuss because this is systemic gaslighting on a cultural level.
Right. The clinical term often used is weaponized incompetence.
Exactly. And weaponized incompetence is not about being bad at a chore. Doing a chore terribly so that your partner has to redo it is an aggressive, predatory bid for dominance.
It's a way to avoid the labor, yes.
The abuser is communicating a very specific message. They are saying, I am going to make it so deeply inconvenient, so emotionally exhausting for you to ask for my help that you will eventually just do everything yourself.
And they exploit the cultural narrative of the bumbling partner to do it.
Entirely. They evade their responsibilities and get the benefits of a well-run household without contributing any of the labor. It is a brilliant, albeit cowardly, strategy.
And then the victim complains.
And if you complain about the greasy pots, they pivot. Suddenly, you are the nagging, controlling perfectionist. They orchestrate a scenario where they always win and you always look like the villain.
I completely agree with your assessment of the tactic. But what actually happens to the victim in that dynamic?
They get exhausted.
Over time, it forces them into what we call the apology reflex. Because the victim is constantly dealing with these subtle sabotages, they begin to overfunction to compensate.
They just do everything themselves.
Right, and they start constantly apologizing just to keep the peace. The clinical reality here is that the victim's nervous system learns through repeated exposure that offering an apology first is just energetically cheaper.
Cheaper than what?
Cheaper than waiting to see if a massive conflict will erupt over a dirty kitchen. It triggers a profound trauma response. The victim is paralyzed, not just by the sheer volume of unwashed laundry, but by the complete lack of a safe relational anchor.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning.
Why not?
Because you're still treating this like a passive biological response. That isn't just accidental freezing, and it's certainly not just depression. That is the abuser successfully executing weaponized guilt to actively paralyze their target.
They are paralyzed, though.
Yes, but the abuser knows exactly what they are doing. Let's look at the timeline. They agree to do the dishes on Thursday night because they want to avoid the immediate conflict of saying no.
They want to look like the good guy in that moment.
Exactly. Then they use procrastination to express their hidden resentment on Friday morning. It is a highly calculated two-step maneuver.
Secure the immediate peace.
Secure their image as a cooperative partner, and then inflict the punishment later when they have plausible deniability.
But the punishment only works because it exploits the victim's attachment conditioning. If the victim didn't care about the relationship, they would just walk away.
True, they do use empathy against them.
Let's move to how they manipulate language, because this is where the erosion of sanity really accelerates. The pots are physical, but the verbal manipulation is where the deepest psychological cuts happen.
You're talking about the micro-insults.
Yes, think about micro-insults and backhanded compliments.
The language manipulation is where their predatory nature really shines. A covert narcissist will say something like, "Oh, you look amazing when you actually make an effort."
Or you would be a great supervisor if you only knew how to be strong with people.
Right. It's a micro-assault perfectly disguised as flattery. What the profiler sees here is the deliberate use of a partial truth to mask a devastating insult.
It just cuts right to the core.
It really does. The person might actually be a new supervisor, but the abuser slips the knife in by questioning their fundamental strength. It's an active, hostile maneuver.
It is.
It's like someone slowly turning down the oxygen in a room, and when you finally start gasping for air, they look at you with total pity.
Right, like they have no idea what's wrong.
Exactly. They say, "Why are you always so out of breath? You really need to work on your cardio."
Oh, that is so insidious.
It is. They intentionally create the deficit and then they judge you for the symptom. This is exactly what trips victims up.
That oxygen analogy is spot on for how it feels, and the result of that exact maneuver is a micro-invalidation.
Which is what?
That is what actually destroys the victim's psychological reality. The covert narcissist loves loopholes, right? They live in the gray areas of language.
Plausible deniability again.
Always. When confronted about a backhanded compliment, they will say, "I didn't lie, I just didn't tell you the whole story," or "I was obviously just joking, why are you always so incredibly sensitive?"
Turning it right back on the victim.
Exactly. When a victim hears that repeatedly, they are placed in a cognitive double bind. A double bind is a situation where every choice leads to a loss.
So they can't win.
No. If the victim defends themselves against the insult, saying, "Hey, I am strong with people," the abuser pivots, widens their eyes, and accuses them of being paranoid or aggressive.
And if they stay silent?
If they stay silent to keep the peace, the insult takes root in their subconscious and slowly rots their self-esteem. It leaves the victim chronically depleted.
It's just a lose-lose scenario.
And I want to stress this. This isn't just about hurt feelings. This level of chronic cognitive dissonance, holding two conflicting realities in your head at once, leads to severe physical health issues.
Because the stress never stops?
The body literally keeps the score when the mind is being gaslit. The stress hormones never shut off.
But again, this points back to the mechanism being the calculated acquisition of power. The abuser is establishing a dynamic where they are the sole arbiter of truth.
They do control a narrative.
Entirely. They dictate what qualifies as a joke, what qualifies as a lie, and what qualifies as reality. They are basically playing God in the microcosm of that relationship.
I agree that they are dictating the narrative, but the destruction happens because the victim eventually internalizes that false narrative.
They start believing it.
Yes, the abuser's greatest victory isn't the power itself. The ultimate victory is getting the victim to police their own thoughts.
Doing the dirty work for them.
Exactly. The abuser can eventually go to sleep because the victim starts doing the abuser's work for them. The victim is lying awake at 3 a.m., second-guessing every instinct.
Wondering if they're the crazy one.
Right, wondering, am I expecting too much? Was it really just an honest mistake? Am I the abusive one for being so angry about a pot in the sink?
And that internal static.
That complete loss of self-trust? Yes. That is the true mechanism of destruction.
Which naturally brings us to the critical question for anyone listening who recognizes this dynamic. How do you break this cycle?
This is the million-dollar question.
From a behavioral profiling standpoint, the answer is strategic Cold, analytical confrontation. You have to absolutely stop playing their game on their terms.
Confrontation?
Yes. If they botch a chore deliberately, you do not redo it. You hand it back to them. You say the pots are still greasy, please finish washing them.
Okay, but
You use I statements based entirely on observable, undeniable facts. You refuse to engage with their emotional deflections.
just completely detached?
Yes, you check your assumptions, you remove all emotion from your voice, and you bring their hidden, covert behavior into the glaring light. You force accountability in the exact spaces where they have designed plausible deniability.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why.
What's wrong with holding them accountable?
Your approach assumes a victim has a perfectly regulated nervous system capable of executing a cold, analytical courtroom-style confrontation.
You just have to practice it.
A victim simply cannot confront a predator if their nervous system is locked in a trauma response. If you tell a depleted, gaslit victim to just hand the chore back and demand accountability, you are setting them up for a massive physiological crash.
When the abuser fights back,
When the abuser inevitably gaslights them again, the abuser will just say, "Wow, you're really losing your mind over a pot, aren't you?" And the victim will crumble because they don't have the internal armor yet.
So what is the alternative? Passivity? Just leaving the pots in the sink until mold grows and accepting the micro-insults?
No, absolutely not passivity. The alternative is regulation before confrontation. You cannot go to war if you can't feel your own feet on the floor.
Okay, so how do you regulate?
In clinical practice, we often use frameworks from dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT. Specifically, there is an interpersonal effectiveness skill called Dear Man.
Okay, what does that stand for?
The acronym stands for describe, express, assert, reinforce, mindful, appear confident, and negotiate.
Negotiate?
Yes, but I want to be clear. Before a victim can even utilize a tool like Dear Man, they have to build self-worth and somatic grounding.
They have to get their footing.
They have to learn how to recognize their own bodily cues first. When the covert narcissist enters the room, does your chest tighten? Does your breathing get shallow?
Because the body knows the threat is there.
Exactly. Those physical cues signal that the abuser is manipulating the environment. You have to heal the nervous system so it can accurately detect threat again, because the narcissist has completely scrambled the victim's radar.
Okay, hold on. Let's look at that Dear Man acronym. The last letter stands for negotiate.
It does.
How in the world can you negotiate with a predator whose primary goal is your subjugation?
It's not about compromising your reality.
But the moment you negotiate with a covert narcissist, you validate their false premise. If they say, I forgot to pay the electric bill because you stressed me out this morning, and you sit down to negotiate that conflict,
I see what you're saying.
you have just accepted partial blame for their intentional financial sabotage. You've lost before you even opened your mouth.
That's a very fair critique of how clinical tools can be misused if they're applied blindly. But the mindful and assert steps within that framework are designed exactly for this type of manipulation.
How do those steps prevent the trap?
There is a technique within this called the broken record. It teaches the victim to completely ignore the personal attacks, the sighs, the pity plays, and the distractions.
Just don't take the bait.
Exactly. When the abuser tries to pivot and blame the victim for being stressful, the victim is trained to ignore the bait entirely. They don't defend themselves.
They just stick to the fact.
They just repeat the boundary. We are talking about the electric bill. It needs to be paid today. It's about regulating yourself enough to hold the line without falling into the emotional trap.
I see the value in staying emotionally detached. In fact, that's what profiling teaches as well. But I still argue that the confrontation itself must be unapologetic and focused on exposing the behavior.
Exposing the behavior is powerful. Yes.
When you use the systemic lens, you realize that covert abuse, especially in domestic settings, relies heavily on societal norms. It relies on the expectation that one partner should manage the other's incompetence.
Giving them the benefit of the doubt.
Right. Confrontation is about rejecting that systemic gaslighting. It's looking them in the eye and saying, I am not your mother and I am not your manager. Your incompetence is a weapon and I refuse to be injured by it anymore.
And I completely agree with the empowerment aspect of that. It is incredibly powerful.
But we have to give listeners a realistic warning here.
Which is?
When a victim finally sets that boundary, the covert narcissist doesn't just experience an epiphany, apologize, and change.
No, they absolutely do not.
They escalate. When their covert tactics stop working, they often switch from the silent treatment to playing the ultimate grandiose victim.
Oh, the smear campaigns.
Yes, they will run a smear campaign to your mutual friends, to your family, or to HR. They will claim that they are the ones being abused because their partner is so demanding, controlling, and clinically unstable.
Exactly. Which perfectly proves my point about the underlying predatory nature of this personality.
How so?
The moment the mask slips and their primary tool is taken away, they don't retreat. They deploy a new strategy to regain power.
They adapt.
They use gossip and relational aggression as separate, calculated tools to control their social circles. They will act incredibly kind, generous, and benevolent to the outside world.
Portraying themselves as the long-suffering partner.
Yes, while simultaneously engaging in horrific, covert hostility behind closed doors. It is a highly calculated, dual-faced survival mechanism designed to totally isolate the target.
It absolutely is. And that dual face is exactly what causes the complex PTSD we talked about earlier.
It makes you feel crazy.
Imagine the cognitive dissonance of seeing your abuser praised by your community, your church, or your coworkers as a great guy or a sweet, shy woman, while you are literally dying inside from 1,000 invisible cuts.
It is psychologically shattering.
It isolates the victim perfectly. Because who are they going to tell? The abuser has already laid the groundwork. They've already whispered to everyone that the victim is a bit unstable or difficult.
Setting the stage for the discard.
This is exactly why the somatic healing, the nervous system repair, has to come first. The victim has to learn to trust their own reality from the inside out, even when the rest of the world is completely buying the narcissist's act.
That brings us to a crucial point of agreement in our analysis.
I think it does.
Whether we focus on the calculated predator pulling the strings or the traumatized victim caught in the web, we are both talking about a chilling, highly destructive pattern of coercive control.
Absolutely. Covert narcissism is not just someone being a bit selfish.
No, it's not someone having a bad day. It is an architecture of abuse that requires intense education, radical acceptance, and deep awareness to survive.
Survival requires pulling back the curtain on these invisible behaviors. It requires naming the silent treatment, the backhanded compliments, and the weaponized incompetence for what they truly are.
Emotional violence.
Emotional violence, yes. It is incredibly validating for a victim to finally have a language for what they've been experiencing.
To know they aren't crazy.
To know that the bone-deep exhaustion they feel isn't because they are failing at their relationship, but because they are under a relentless, invisible attack.
So, to summarize my position on this, we must expose covert narcissism as a calculated, predatory strategy. These individuals mask their grandiosity with victimhood and false humility, specifically to evade accountability and subjugate the people closest to them. The most effective way to combat it is through cold, objective exposure of their tactics.
And to summarize my perspective, the core of this abuse is defined by the invisible, somatic destruction of the victim's reality and self-trust.
The damage done.
Right. The abuser's tactics, while malicious, are merely the vehicle. The true tragedy is the erosion of the victim's nervous system, leaving them trapped in a cycle of self-doubt. Healing just has to prioritize somatic grounding and the rebuilding of the victim's psychological boundaries before any confrontation can be successful.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it with one final thought.
Go ahead.
Is it possible that the abuser's greatest weapon isn't actually their internal manipulation, but rather our society's willingness to give their shy, bumbling, or introverted persona the benefit of the doubt?
Wow.
If society stopped excusing weaponized incompetence as a quirk, covert narcissists would lose their very best camouflage.
That is a profound question to end on. Society certainly provides the dark corners where this type of abuse hides.
It definitely does.
As long as we brush off micro-insults as just jokes, and as long as we treat weaponized incompetence as just how some people are, we are entirely complicit in maintaining that camouflage.
We encourage you to reflect on these subtle red flags in your own relationships, your workplaces, and your families.
Yes.
There is much more to explore in the clinical literature on dark psychology, coercive control, and trauma recovery.
And we leave it to you to form your own conclusions on how best to navigate these muddy waters. And above all else, trust your gut. If you feel consistently drained, confused, and self-doubting around someone who appears perfectly pleasant to everyone else,
Your nervous system is trying to tell you something.
it's trying to tell you something incredibly important. Listen to it.
Next time you see a greasy pot left soaking in cold, scummy water for 3 days, ask yourself, are you looking at a simple oversight or are you looking at a monument to disrespect? Thank you for joining us.